is Matthew Wayne Selznick, and this is Sonitotum, episode 81. Hello, my friends. On this and every episode of Sonitotum, we talk about making stuff, mostly writing, finding success as we each define it for ourselves, and staying healthy and sane in the process. Episodes alternate between me talking to you about those three things, especially as relates to my own creative writing life, discoveries, lessons learned, triumphs, challenges, all that good stuff, and a conversation with another author or writer or creative person. And that's what this episode's all about. This time around, we're sitting down, and by we, I mean me, and we're sitting down and talking to Anthony W. Eichenlaub. This interview was recorded on January 24th, 2023. Today is April 26th, 2023. And I'm coming to you once again from the lush and lavish studios of MWS Media in Southern California. So Anthony W. Eichenlaub is an author of a wide range of science fiction and fantasy works. His novels are a hodgepodge of cyberpunk westerns, space opera, and technothrillers. His short stories have appeared in numerous publications, including Daily Science Fiction, Little Blue Marble, and On-Spec Magazine. Anthony is a member, as am I, and a volunteer, as I am not, with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. He's a member of the Rochester Writers Group and a teaching artist at the Loft Literary Center. In his spare time, he enjoys landscaping, woodworking, we talk a little bit about that in the episode, and long walks with his lazy dog, as he says. You can find all of his books and other information at anthonyeichenlaub.com. Let me spell that out for you. Anthony is, as you would expect. Eichenlaub is EICHENLAUB. anthonyeichenlaub.com. And I will have links to all of his stuff, including his works and his website and all that, at mattselznick.com/sonitotum-081. Let's get into it. Here's me talking to Anthony W. Eichenlaub. So I always like to start off by asking a couple of questions that can be as deep as you want. And the first thing is, what is it that you create?
I am a science fiction writer almost exclusively. Some of my short stories tend into fantasy or whatever I happen to feel like. But most of what I create is science fiction, and some of it's a little bit harder science fiction, like a near future. I have a near future series that I describe as Minnesota technothrillers. They follow a elderly hacker as he attempts to help his granddaughters, and at the same time he discovers that his granddaughters are dangerous and in trouble, and drama ensues. So I go from that near future stuff, and then I have some way distant future space opera kind of colony planet sort of stuff, and I have a lot of fun with those. And the project that I'm working on is a sci-fi noir, and that's another very distant future kind of thing. So yeah, mostly science fiction. I'm also kind of a hobbyist, so I do wood turning, woodworking. I make pens, landscaping. I'm constantly making stuff, and writing is the only one that I've actually tried to move more toward career than hobby. But I mean, making stuff is sort of my default state.
In the spirit of a 4-year-old, my next question is always, why do you create?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I used to have a 4-year-old, and I could usually out why them, but I think I make stuff because my whole life I've just kind of daydreamed a lot. Like if I'm bored, I daydream, and just getting that stuff on paper, like getting those ideas out there. And this is sort of how I process complex ideas. Like the sci-fi noir that I'm working on right now, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and this is a future space station that has a very high Catholic population. And okay, how does future Catholicism work in that environment? And yeah, most of my readers probably don't care that much that I'm working through interesting theological ideas, but this is how I process them. And yeah, there's a murder and stuff going on, and the church is tangentially involved, but this is how I get through those ideas. And that is always fascinating to me.
So a couple of things I want to follow up with. The first is, so you said you've been a daydreamer your whole life. What do you think has driven that? Have you ever thought about, tracing it back? Like, well, why am I so inward looking? What is maybe the spark or the catalyst that brought that on?
I think a lot of that just comes to upbringing. I think that when I was young, I lived in an environment where creativity was valued. My parents valued that. Okay, yeah, I wanted to get into graphic design, and they said, yes, okay, go ahead, do that. And it was me who decided eventually that, oh yeah, I can't make a career of this. I'm just not good enough at graphic design. So I went into computer science. So I had a whole wonderful career in tech, but the art has always pulled me back. And I can draw, I can do this woodworking stuff, but the thing that I am really good at is writing. And so that's the one that I've the art that I've picked to pursue and become as good as I can possibly be at it.
I can relate. There's a lot of things that I dabble in. I've learned over the decades that if I'm not making something, I get a little grouchy, get a little irritable. I'm not, there's no diagnosis or anything, but I have recognized that when I'm not deliberately in pursuit of some sort of creative endeavor, all of the sort of secondary symptoms of depression kick in: the irritability, the short-tempered, all those things. And so, yeah, there's a million things. I've been a musician for many years and used to be a decent artist until I focused more on music, and that muscle atrophied.
Yeah, it's interesting how if you focus on something, you can get good at it. There is such a thing as talent, but I always feel like just like being able to put yourself into something and work at it is a muscle. And yeah, you can overcome a lot.
He reminded me of a James Baldwin quote. He said, "Talent is insignificant. I know a lot of talented ruins. Beyond talent lie all the usual words: discipline, love, luck, but most of all, endurance." And I think that's kind of exactly what you're saying. Is like,
yes,
pick one and work at it, man.
Yep. Just keep going at it, and you can do it.
Yeah. And the other thing that really put my ears up was you mentioned that your space opera has this sort of secondary focus on the Catholic Church and future theology. And immediately I thought, have you read Maria Doria Russell's The Sparrow and the follow-up Children of God?
No, I haven't.
You're going to want to check this out.
I'm going to put those on my list.
Yeah, you're going to want to check this out. This is a near future Vatican-sponsored, Jesuit-led expedition to Alpha Centauri after we discover that, there's probably a civilization there. And it's, well, as you said, drama ensues.
Yeah. That's not the kind of stuff I write exactly, but I love reading it. Like that sort of literary end of things, of science fiction. And
tell me a little bit about, you said you make pens.
I do. Yep. I make pens, and those I actually do sell occasionally, mostly just because you can only have so many pens. But it's just wood turning. You can buy a kit, and like I love fountain pens. So you can buy a kit that has the kind of the hardware, and then you do wood turning and get like the right shape of piece to fit a hand.
Right.
And you assemble it all, and then you've got a pen.
That's fantastic. I can already see a sub niche market for you as birthday presents for authors. Custom made pens, like.
Yep. Yeah. I made one for myself a little while ago because we did a vacation up to Winnipeg, and on the shores of Lake Winnipeg, I found a hunk of dead wood and I brought it home and I carved it down into the right shape and did the wood turning thing and made a pen for myself. So that's my main writing pen now until it breaks. Just to remind myself of that vacation, because it was a good one.
That's almost talismanic, that's you created this totem for yourself. Do you tend to write in longhand when you're writing fiction?
Very little, just with short stories, because and the problem is that I have just terrible handwriting.
Right.
So then transcribing that into the computer is always a pain.
Yeah. When I try it every now and again, just to sort of take a different direction, or to shake up the brain a little bit, I just have to print. But yeah, if I were to try my penmanship is, well, just like any of those artistic things we talked about, it's definitely deteriorated with lack of use.
Yep. Yeah. I do find that when I'm writing on the computer, I will get into a mental state where the number of distractions just destroys me and I just cannot get any writing done. And so then it's good to switch to paper and put some distance between myself and things that ding.
Yeah, indeed. So you mentioned that you turned your focus to writing at some point. Around when was that? And talk about if there was a more conscious decision, how that focus was defined.
That one's actually a pretty easy one for me to answer, because I started writing in my adult life, not as assignments or anything. I started writing just before my first son was born, and he is 17 now. So I've been writing for about 18 years. It was just, what do new parents do? We blog. In that time, that's just what you do. And I was blogging about my baby and my dog and, normal blogging stuff for the early 2000s. Yeah. And I kept sharing these blog entries, and people would say, oh yeah, that was really good. That was amusing. I like your writing. And I thought, oh yeah, I like it when people like my writing. Maybe I should do more of that. And I quickly transitioned into, I like tabletop gaming. So I transitioned from that into writing for kind of one of these places that does D&D supplemental stuff. So I did a couple articles for that. And then that quickly went into short stories. And then I just kept writing short stories and got decent at it. I didn't get into novels until, maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, about 10 years ago. And that really only happened because I was writing a short story and got 5,000 words in and realized that, nope, this is not ending anytime soon. And this is a novel length thing. And then I said, oh, sure, why not? Let's just do that. And so that sort of led into novels, which I also now enjoy. That's most of what I spend my time on now.
The through line from tabletop gaming, tabletop RPGs, I assume, through to writing fiction is so common.
I was a DM in our Dungeons and Dragons group since high school. I've just been DMing forever. And when I started writing, I realized that, I had been putting so much energy into creating stuff that my little group of people would just tear to shreds. Like if I wrote an interesting, intricate plot line, they would avoid it at all costs. And now I can write stories that people will read and enjoy and interact with in a way that I control a little bit more. And on one hand, it's a very different thing. On the other hand, it works a lot of those same creative muscles, like that storytelling.
Absolutely. And I found that gaming, whether it was RPGs, which I haven't really actively done since, probably the late 80s.
A little while.
Yeah, it's been some time. but even then, I didn't realize it then, but looking back, I realized that running a game was a form of procrastination. If you know what I mean. It was like, I'm still creating, I'm still making something, but it's keeping me from doing.
Right. But I'm actually doing.
Yeah. And
this could be a lot more.
Could be more. And it's scratching the itch without handling the underlying cause of the itch, Same thing with these days. I have to be very careful about open world computer games Because it's the same thing, our minds, even notwithstanding having the story handed to us and acting it through in a game, we start to make up the stuff and do all those things that we might be doing in preparing to write fiction, but we're not. And what's interesting about coming up with these intricate plots, I want to touch a little bit on first the world building aspect, because you're dealing with whether it's near future or your space opera stuff, or of course the fantasy stuff. How deep do you go on the world building side of it? Is it more just enough for verisimilitude, or how far down do you go? How close to the blades of grass?
Yeah, I try not to get too deep, because I know that if I start getting too deep, I will just spend all of my time on that.
Right.
So the distant future stuff, I've got this space station city, and it kind of exists. It's more of a mood than an actual thing that I think people will build. Like, we can say that it works that way, but would it really? Let's not think about it too much.
Right.
The near future stuff, I tend to rely a lot on my tech career background, and I do research on, okay, how does hacking actually work? How would we solve these problems? And that tends to be a lot more realistic. I still take liberties sometimes, but
sure,
only where necessary. The story kind of rules everything there. Yeah.
The other thing about that struck me was the idea of, with your tabletop folks, sure, they're going to do what they want. It's collaborative storytelling, but that can be frustrating if you've spent a lot of time. And on the sort of subject of, I won't say story control, but story architecture, story structure, are you someone who plans and plots and outlines ahead of time, or as you go, or after the fact? Or
I do, and I do a light outline, so I know kind of what's going to happen in every chapter. And then when I go to write, I can look at that and say, okay, yep, that's what's going to happen in this chapter. And then I write it. I don't know the details of how everything's going to happen, but I'll know what conflicts are going to happen and who's coming out on top in the end, and that kind of thing. And usually on top of that, my first drafts tend to be light drafts. So I will go back in, and if I have side plots, or if I have if I need to flesh out a character or something, that's when I do that. So it tends to be, it's the skeleton, and then you put the meat on the bones.
And how much character work do you do ahead of time, like in that sort of chapter outline phase? How well do you know these folks, or is there more of a discovery?
I know them pretty well.
Yeah. By
that time, because at least the main characters and like the main side characters, I have a write-up. I have like a character sheet even that I put together, like, okay, this is physically what they look like. This is kind of their background, where they're coming from, like what opinions about what's going to happen, just to keep those notes, because otherwise I do tend to forget.
What about the psychological side of the characters? I mean, beyond their opinions, do you have an idea of what their existing flaw is, what they have to fix, how that drives the plot?
Yeah. I usually build in flaws. Everybody gets flaws. I'm generous with flaws. Everybody gets flaws, and they don't always get fixed.
Right.
But they've got them, and they're working with them. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what keeps it interesting. And if sometimes I will get surprised, I'll be writing something and I know what's going to happen, and then I'll get there and say, nope, they wouldn't do that. And then it's a matter of saying, okay, do I want to rewrite the next little bit of plot, or do I want to just go with it? And I usually will see where it's going and then adjust the future outline if I need to.
Yeah, because I think ultimately character is what drives plot.
It's really important to me that the characters are true to themselves. Like they can do their thing.
The one time that I noticed that sort of drift was happening in the draft, I needed certain things in the plot to still happen, even though that character, as I had written them so far and as I understood them so far, had been, they like you say, they wouldn't do that. Or so I realized in this particular case, I need to make him a little more stupid. And then I need to go.
And then it works. Like, they still do this thing because they just haven't figured it out.
Editing is writing. I had to go back and make sure that, okay, the reader has a chance to see that this person, for all the other things you might think of them, they're not all there. They don't have, the light bulbs are all on dim.
Drop that hint a little bit earlier in the story. And
all is well.
Yep. Yeah, I love doing stuff like that. The interesting part to me when I write short stories is that I'm much more likely to scrap everything except for the like if there's a line that I like, I am willing to destroy the rest of the story just to make that line work. You know, they say that you should kill your darlings, but in short story writing, I will save the darling and kill everybody else.
You mentioned writing that one short story that you realized was a novel, and short stories just structurally and intentionally are a whole different thing.
Yep, I can be a lot more experimental with it.
That totally makes sense in getting rid of all of the chaff and saving the germ, because a short story is all about the germ. Yeah.
Yep. This is the one good thing. We're keeping it.
So the three pillars of the show are making stuff, finding success as we each define it for ourselves, and staying healthy and sane in the process. And we've talked a lot about making stuff, and all of these things intertwine as we go. You've been actively writing for about 18 years, as you said, in one form or another. How do you define success for yourself as a writer, and where do you feel like you are in those terms?
I like to think of it as three different things. Like, one, people are reading my work. Like, anytime somebody reads my work, I consider that a success. Like, anytime they like it, that's even more of a success. But, the fact that they're picking up my work and they're willingly reading through the whole book, that's awesome. For me, I'm happy with that. The next thing is respect of my peers. Like, I would love to have an award or something, and I'm nowhere on that goal yet. And then there's money, and, money's great. I'm an indie published author, so I'm doing my own work. I'm putting a lot of my own money back into my work. So I kind of break even right now. So I've still got some work to do there, but every year gets better and better for the money aspect of things.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you're breaking even, if nothing else, that tells us that you have figured out what you can spend.
Yeah. And it's really more of, okay, now I'm getting more money in, so then I'm spending more money, because spending money on things that will get my stuff more read and get more of my stuff out there. And the more that's out there, the more money I'm making. I'm in a good place there, but there's more work to do.
Oh, well, always, right?
Yeah.
Kind of overlapping with the success topic is marketing and all of those sort of things, especially as an indie producer. Where does most of your effort go when it comes to making sure your stuff reaches the right readers?
Most of my marketing money spending goes to Facebook, which is, every once in a while I try to get Amazon ads to work, and it usually fails for me. Like, it'll kind of start going a little bit, and then it'll all drop off and go away. And I don't want to do that. I just don't want to spend the money to make that work.
Right.
But Facebook, for some reason, I have a few keywords that I use and a few tools that I have to get things to the right people. And I don't understand it, but people on Facebook are ready to buy books. And I can get them one click away, and I can get them buying books. So I'm happy with that, where that is. One of the things I want to do is diversify that, because I just don't like sending all my money to Facebook.
Well, yeah, for sure. So are you targeting your Amazon page, sending them to the Amazon page, or what are you doing?
My books are all wide. So I sell through, wherever I can possibly sell them.
Right.
So I usually send them to Books to Read or something like that. I forget what it's called. From there, they can get anywhere. And I've experimented with sending them straight to Amazon or sending them to this and seeing where they want to go. And they almost always go to Amazon.
Sure.
But I don't see a significant bump when I send them straight to Amazon. So it's something I'm constantly experimenting with. So I like to give options.
Exactly. Yeah. Just why not? Yeah. Make sure that you don't want to miss the people who don't want to go to Amazon.
Right.
For sure.
There are a few that don't want to go to Amazon or will not go to Amazon.
So you're sending them there. Are you doing anything to capture email addresses, or do you maintain a mailing list? And if so,
I do maintain a mailing list, and I send out a monthly newsletter. I have a lot of fun with that. I probably spend too much time on it, but that's a fun one. I use BookFunnel to collect more readers. So I have like a book that I give away, and I rotate through those. And then monthly newsletter, and I've done a second monthly newsletter. So 2 a month, with the second one mostly being book recommendations. So book recommendations, and then sending people back to BookFunnel where they can find other authors, and it's sort of a big cycle.
Right. And with the BookFunnel recommendations and, sending folks back to BookFunnel, is there an affiliate arrangement there, or is that?
Nope. The way it works is I'll join a group promo. So a bunch of indie authors will get together and all push the same page.
Gotcha.
And the page has links to all of our books, and all of our books are free if you sign up for the newsletter. And that's, yeah.
It's almost like a tightly focused Humble Bumble kind of thing.
It's pretty similar.
And the BookFunnel thing, the advantage there, of course, is that you're getting actual email addresses that you can put into your own funnel and move through. On the people reading it and liking it, of course, right? My sort of glib thing is that, I say that, when people ask, oh, what do you make? I said, I make things for people who like the kinds of things that I make. because
we just gotta hope that there are enough of those weirdos out there.
Exactly. So that's interesting that you're, in a way, you're casting it kind of a wide net in the pond of the subgenre that you're working with. But how much crossover do you see on people, those people that you can track? So I'm saying probably people on your actual mailing list who you can follow the sales and whatnot. How much crossover do you see between the different genres that you write in? Are readers fans of you overall, or do they seem to be fans of a particular series or a particular space that you work in?
Some of them cross over. I think a lot of them have very specific genre that they're looking at.
Yeah.
And I went in aware that by switching as much as I do, I keep it all science fiction for my novels, but there's a lot that can vary a lot.
Yeah.
By switching that, I know that I'm hurting some of my crossover potential, but I'm fine with that. That's sort of keeping things alive for myself is more important than the potential money that I could make by making things more focused.
Sure, absolutely. And those folks who do cross over, those are your golden children, right? Those are the ones that you want to be.
Those are the biggest fans.
Yeah. The peer thing has come up quite a bit as I've talked to folks. I'll be honest, I don't think much about award recognition and whatnot. Certainly I get a kick out of when, a peer appreciates what I've done, and that kind of connection.
Yeah, that is all very cool. And I always get a kick out of, when my writing peers come up and say, hey, I like this story. Like I have one in daily science fiction, and someone said they enjoyed it. I'm like, oh, yes, that is the best.
I know that name. I know that name. And they said they like it. Yeah. I guess if nothing else, it lets you know you're on the right track. It's a little bit of soul coal, right? For the engine.
Yeah. One of my motivations for just wanting to get award recognition, and I don't know if it'll ever happen, but you can hope. One of the things that I also really enjoy doing as a writer is teaching. And so I teach through community ed. I teach through the Loft Literary Center, and there's always this struggle to get students. So being able to say, even just like nominated, like award nominated, like just that little line, and they'll look at, the students are more likely to say, oh yeah, all right, I'll drop, $50 or $100 on this class and see if this guy's any good.
Tell me a little bit more about the teaching. How did you fall into that?
My dad was a teacher. And so I've always kind of respected just his ability to stand in front of a classroom and keep people interested. Like that always amazes me. And let's see, it was through community ed first. I started just like a writing short stories class and really enjoyed it. And I don't know how many times I've run that same class, but it's always evolving. I've had students that come back for round after round after round because they like the class and they like to see how it's changing and they like the motivation. And it always amazes me that I'll get students and I'll look at their work and say, yep, you're a better writer than me. Here's your next step. And I can help them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have been encouraged to do that on a more official level. I do a lot of mentoring, and my day job is a creative service provider, and I mostly am working with authors and podcasters and whatnot. And so that kind of stuff comes up all the time. And I do directed one-on-one coachings now and then. But yeah, I'm always interested to hear about that because there's online courses, of course, that you can create. But the in-person thing, I mean, those folks they're literally showing up for it so that you know that they're going to be committed to the actual learning, as opposed to an online course where, okay, great, I made my $97, but what's...
Yeah, no, these people show up week after week after week. And
class after class, as you said.
Class after class. And I'm up there, I keep it entertaining and I get them some information, and we do writing exercises and we have assignments for them, and it's not mandatory because it's just community ed, but I have assignments, and come back next week and we're going to do some critiques and we're going to look at each other's work and we're going to figure out how to get better.
So my mind always works on two different levels, the artistic and adding to the culture and that form of fulfillment, but I also have a marketer's brain. So my next thought, almost in spite of myself, is, and so what do you do with those folks once they've gone through the class process? Is there any kind of follow-up? And I'm not saying you try to, pimp your books to them, but where does it go next?
I don't try to sell them my books, but I do have a Discord that I run. I started the Discord as part of my Patreon. So I had it and said, oh yeah, I'll just have this for Patreon subscribers. And I thought, there's 8 of us here and I'm the only one talking. So I need more people.
Yeah.
So then I said, all right, any student of mine can come and join. And I've been expanding that. So really anybody who knows me can come and join and talk about this stuff. And part of it's for writers and part of it's for readers, but you don't have to stay on your side, but it's sort of targeted. And I've gotten people to come in and so they keep me updated on what's happening with their stories. Like, oh, I sold a story. Oh, that's awesome. Yes, that's very cool.
That's lovely. Yeah. And that adds, of course, others see that and the encouragement bleeds out. Yes. Across everybody. I think you're the first person I've talked to so far who runs a patron campaign. Talk a little bit about that in as much detail as you'd like. When did you start it? What are you offering? Those kinds of things.
I started it quite a while ago and just kind of let it run. It was mostly friends and family, very small. And I'd say 8, but right now it's at like 10 and maybe a little bit more now. So very small. And I've recently revamped it and restructured things. The trick with running a Patreon like that is to give value without sucking up a lot of time.
Yes.
So I do a monthly update, and that kind of goes out to most of the tiers. There's a very lowest tier, like don't bother me, I just want to support you tier. And up from that, I have a tier where you get the updates. And up from that, I have a tier where, you get every book that I write. Like before it comes out, you can have the book. And I actually have a tier where you get the paperback every time I release a paperback. And that one's expensive, but that's fine. Like I'd want to have that there. So we've been getting a little bit more interaction on the Discord because I'm letting more people in. And every month I publish through there either a short story or a chapter from an upcoming book or something like that, some kind of fiction. And that doesn't cost me a lot because I've got the short story. It's usually something that has been sold and rights have reverted back or didn't sell, in which case I talk about, okay, this is why I like this story. This is why it's not going to sell.
Yeah, right.
or either not going to sell or not going to sell for a pro rate. And I have a bunch of stories that are just probably never going to find a home. And now they've got a home, and I can use it as kind of it's instructional. And it's also just like, hey, look at my weird stories.
That's cool. Yeah. With my Patreon, I first used the platform wow, probably within 3 months of it being founded, I had seen a talk online from Jack Conte, the co-founder. And I've always been a sort of a, hey kids, let's put on a show kind of attitude, DIY punk rock ethic. So the idea of neo patronage was not new to me, and pretty exciting to see it from this guy in particular, because I knew of Pomplamoose, the band that he and his wife Natalie had championed for so long and been part of. But as you say, the challenge is providing value without having it consume all of your time, having it become a third or fourth job.
Yeah. Now suddenly you're not writing anymore. You're just managing Patreon.
Yeah.
Getting t-shirts out to people or something.
Right. And so I had it running for a while, and the usual suspects were there, and I'm deeply grateful for them, of course, but it wasn't growing. And I realized I wasn't putting effort into it because of that time thing.
Right.
Took it away, relaunched it last summer, and totally overthought it. I had, I think, 5 different tiers and all these different levels. And I realized the more tiers I had, the more work I was doing, even if it was only 4 people or 5 people. And I'm not saying this works for everybody, but the solution I kind of had was to just ridiculously simplify things and become a lot less precious about what I was holding back. So I basically took everything. I had, a $1 tier, a 5, a 10, a 15, and a 20, I think. And I stripped it all back. I said, okay, 1 tier, $5. You get everything.
Yep. You get all the stuff. Yeah.
I'm going to do the work anyway,
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the third pillar of the show, and that's staying healthy and sane while you are pursuing this creative life. What challenges do you face? How have you figured out what works for you, and share in whatever depth you would like to?
One thing that I found that really helped was getting laid off from my day job.
Yeah. How long ago was that?
That was actually beginning of pandemic. And it was sort of one of these things where I knew it was coming. The company I was working with does this all the time. And like you could see the writing on the wall. Okay, the department that I'm in is in a department that's going to be just destroyed by the pandemic. And so they got it a little earlier than I thought they would, but no big deal. I was not devastated. I was one of these people who got laid off who said,
yeah, I've been there. I have been there.
Now I can do what I want. I've been my whole career, I have been saving my money and doing a really good job saving for retirement. So I am happy with finances. My wife still works. She had just got a promotion. So these numbers check out. I can write now. And that change was amazing. I realized that I had been doing a full-time job and then a full-time job because I had been writing every weekend. I would get up early. I would write until noon when everybody else in the family woke up. And then at night I would be writing, my whole evening. And wow, it turned into a lot. I love writing, but it's just a lot of work. Writing over lunch, writing, whenever I can. And now if writing is my full-time job, now I actually force myself to not do it. So on weekends, I don't write. I play video games. I hang out with my 2 sons. I do, landscaping or something.
Yeah.
And that has been just amazing for me. I'm much happier. I feel more relaxed all the time in everything that I do. So if you can manage that, I don't know how helpful that is for anybody.
Well, I think it was fortuitous for you too, because that happened, if I'm doing the math right, that happened when you were able to make that transition. Number one, you were in a position financially, but also because you said, it was second job. And I immediately thought, well, and you had a family or have a family.
Right.
But you were lucky in a way because your kids were older teens, right? When this happened. So they were at the point where, Dad, leave us alone, Yeah,
they very much are. And we had that year of stay-at-home learning for the kids. And so I was the one who was there. I had time to be able to say, okay, here's, how you get set up with your virtual learning stuff and how you organize it and get your work done. And, I could be kind of that stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
And I still do all that stay-at-home dad stuff. And I love it. But I also have the writing.
Yeah.
And the writing is very good for me. I think that when I talk about keeping my sanity, the two things that I do are write, because that helps me process things, and not write, because when writing becomes really hard, like really just too much, like I have to pull myself away and just relax. Read a little bit. So writing and not writing.
Talk about what that means for you when you said when the writing gets really hard. What?
Yeah. There's always a point in every book that I write. There's sort of that middle part where I start losing the traction on what is happening and like how all of the plot threads are going to come together. And I've got my outline, but it doesn't have all the details that I need. And there's always that point where I need to just step back and look at it, or even step back and not look at it, go do something else, go cook supper or something. And then the ideas will sort of percolate through and it'll all click. And then I can go back to writing and have no trouble at all. But if I sit there and try to push, then nothing's going to happen.
My current as we're talking now at the end of January 2023, my current work in progress, and honestly, by the time this episode comes out, it's still going to be my work in progress. But yeah, I'm working on a novel, and by the time I get to actually typing manuscript words, I've already kind of got a draft zero. I do kind of a beat by beat outline after a lot of thought. So a lot of those thinking pauses, that middle, what the hell am I doing? That happens before I've even started writing prose.
Yeah.
But I totally feel that. And on this current work, it took months for me to untie. I think earlier we were talking about, the character just wouldn't do that.
Yep.
And I couldn't untie why the character would do anything. What was really the point?
Why don't
here?
they just go home?
Yeah, kinda. Yeah. What was really the point? And this is kind of why I mentioned flaw earlier, is figuring out, what it is that's wrong with the character that causes them to make the choices that they make that create the problem that they got to solve themselves. Fix yourself before you wreck yourself, right?
Yeah.
They got to solve themselves before anything else is ever going to get fixed. And it took getting completely away, as you said, getting completely away from the sort of official writing environment to allow my brain to figure that out. And some of it for me is pretty analytical. I'm a fan and a student of story architecture and just, how these things are put together without kind of resorting to the formulaic, hero's journey steps that, that's not supposed to be a blueprint,
Right. Yeah.
And so many authors and filmmakers especially will rely on it, but just digging deep. And you mentioned reading too. And I'm sure it differs from project to project from time to time, but what are some of the things that you're reading? Is there anything that you're always going back to in order to spark that, or is it just serendipitous?
I don't do a lot of rereading. I tend to read very slowly. I like to read in depth, and I do mix it between nonfiction and fiction, but mostly it's fiction, and mostly it's like I'm writing a sci-fi noir. So some of the things that I go back to are like Raymond Chandler, like noir, like, okay, I need to get the feel for noir. Like how are these things put together? What's the mood? Like I know the mood, but really when you read it, it's like, oh, they've ramped it up. Like it's really that. So I'll read a lot of that, and I'll read any other sci-fi noirs that I can get into, and mysteries. I like to see how they're put together, how hints are dropped earlier on, and how sort of the character motivation works. I love that kind of stuff.
And are you doing actual critical reads where you're taking notes, or are you just sort of letting it soak in by osmosis?
Mostly just letting it soak in. I don't take a lot of notes.
Yeah.
I do, mentally kind of take note of, oh yeah, I see how that,
right.
I see how you're doing that. Like I'm interacting with the author more than the story itself.
Right.
Like I kind of see.
That's the blessing and the curse of doing this for a while is anytime you start to consume narrative fiction, regardless of the form, whether it's a movie or a TV show, or, it's like, oh yeah, no, I I can see the bones.
I see what they're doing.
I know what's up here.
Yep. Yeah. After I started learning like story structure and how things were put together, I was, couldn't watch Law and Order anymore. That's for sure.
We're at minute 48. I know exactly what's going to happen.
Yep, yeah. Oh, it's the character who showed up in the second act when they didn't need to. They're guilty.
Yep. And spoilers you become much more spoiler sensitive because you can extrapolate. Someone thinks they're not giving a spoiler and you're like, nope, you just wrecked it for me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Reading to get that tone. I did something similar with my last book where very deliberately I thought, I'm going to seek out and try to read some beautifully written fantasy, some beautifully written science fiction, because I didn't want to set out to write something, overly flowery and overly, but I wanted to have in my head, all right, don't just tell this story. Try to stretch a little bit. Try to, dare I say it, be a little more literary. And ironically, it turned out to be, for the genre, a very short novel. But damn if I didn't choose those words with an eye on Theodore Sturgeon and Philip Roth and Ursula K. Le Guin, and it helps, I think. And I think that could be, and maybe you've done this from the very beginning. I have not, so I'll speak for myself. But I think that could simply be a hallmark of some artistic maturity. You start to really think about. Well, let me actually turn that around and phrase it as a question. Do you think about challenging yourself with each work? And if so, what does that mean?
Yeah, all the time, really, especially with short stories. With short stories, I am very happy challenging myself to the point where I fail.
Yes.
And that's the medium for me. And that means trying to pull off characters that are different from the characters that I usually write. It's very easy for me to put myself in there. Like, sure, that's the default. But now, okay, how about somebody else with a different background and different ideals and different flaws? So a lot of it's character driven for me, the challenge. And yeah, like you said, like getting out of the rut that I get into with my style, like my voice, and just figuring out how to improve that and get some variety in there. It's always a challenge.
The character thing and putting ourselves into the character, that work in progress that I mentioned, that was part of the problem is I hadn't come far enough away. But here's the tricky thing, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, maybe in the short work, if it's more character driven, is once I realized what that issue was with that character, then I was like, oh, hello. Yeah, no, that is still one of my issues.
Yep. No, it's an ongoing thing for me.
Yeah.
Like when you get a character to a point where they have to make a decision, my default is always, they'll do this. This is the obvious answer. But no. I have to wait and say, okay, from their perspective and their weird personality quirks, what is really the answer? Like, what are they really going to do? What would they try? Getting that to work and getting multiple characters in and interacting with each other is,
of course, the four corner, right? This person affects that person, affects that person, affects that person, and it's not just two people in a room and they both want a glass of water. It's who's bringing the water in and why did they bring it in and who do they want to impress, and The question I often like to close with borders on the corny, and it's not quite what would you tell the 18-year-old self or what would you tell the you when you were just starting out? It's not quite that, but you've been doing this for a while and you're thoughtful about it. If you could distill what you've learned down to sort of a guiding principle when it comes to your creative life, your creative endeavors, your writing life. And while I say, distill it down to a guiding principle, don't think that you have to make it a bumper sticker. Expand on this as much as you like. If you had to do that, and maybe you have done it, what would that be?
That is a good question. As far as my indie career goes, that I've just sort of recently realized and can boil down is that indie writers own everything, but we don't have to do everything. Like just getting to this point where I can say, okay, this whole product is mine, but I can hire out the parts of this that I don't really want to do, that don't energize me. And if I can just focus on the writing, and I like cover art, like, so maybe I'll hire that out, maybe I won't. But like, if I can just focus on those parts, I can have other people do a lot of, like, if I do illustration or if I do like some like trickier cover design, I can't do. So I either bang my head against the wall for hours and hours and hours, or I just pay somebody to do it and they're better at it anyway. So like figuring that out has been a really big deal for me. But yeah, otherwise, just as far as writing, I think that what it boils down to is just continuing to experiment, like continuing to figure out and grow as a writer. And we've all read things where you pick a famous author and we think that their best thing is the first thing that we ever read of theirs. But really, you can look at a whole career and they have changed along the way. Like they very much change. And there was always room for growth as a writer.
So to your first point, when I first started podcasting back in 2004, the focus was on, and I mentioned it earlier, sort of the DIY ethic that, hey kids, let's put on a show kind of, anything is possible if you just decide to do it kind of thing. Yeah. But the slogan of the show was, doing it yourself means never having to go it alone. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And in fact, it's the whole reason it's what I do in the day job, you know, and it's so true. And I think indie writers, especially, there's a point where that makes sense and there's a point where it doesn't make sense, you know, and I think there's value in learning how to change the oil in your car, but there's also more value in understanding when to not do it. And hand it over to somebody else.
Somebody else can do this better. They can do it faster. And really, if I value my time, they're doing it cheaper too. Like if it's going to take me an hour and a half to do something, or I could spend $20, it's probably worth it just for me to just spend the $20.
So long as you spend that hour, that you don't squander it.
Valuable.
That you put it back into the pot one way or the other.
Right. Very true.
And the continuing to experiment thing, you're so right about the creative arc of any writer. And as readers, you tend to like your first experience, right? Maybe it was maybe it tied in with childhood or young adulthood, and these books by this author are always going to be the best ones.
Yeah. And the new stuff's all bad. Like, it's not really bad. They're learning as a writer too.
Right.
And they're saying different things and they're growing as a person. Like there's stuff happening here.
Do you find, and I only bring this up because this is what I find, and it's a point of frustration. Do you find that your older books tend to sell, maybe not more than, but more than you would like when compared to the newer stuff?
My newer stuff is my best selling stuff is the techno-thriller, because I have an easier time marketing those for whatever reason.
Well, that's the reason.
But my first series was cyberpunk westerns, and I had a lot of fun with them, and I love them. But yeah, my writing has grown so much now. Every time I sell one, I'm like, oh, are they really going to like it? And if it gets in the right hands, they do like it. But it's not as good a writing as what I would do now. I'm definitely not going to go back and rewrite it or anything. No. But I don't push those. It's the deep tracks. Like if you love my writing, you will look at that and say, oh yeah, this is where that writing came from. There's some good stuff in there.
And I think this all is really just ego. But my first novel, which is now something like at least 15 years old, I still get emails or, friend requests on social media or whatever. Oh yeah, I love that book. And it's just like, and it is that's great. Thank you. And then it's like, well, I'm so pleased to hear that. Here's what I've been doing lately. Mm-hmm. But folks, they don't always care. They want that first taste of the chocolate that they had, So learning to be grateful for that. And, the audience is going to change and grow, and they might change and grow away from you. And that's okay. Yeah.
That's all right.
There's always new folks out there. Well, is there anything that you would like to add or elaborate on or re-explore that we've talked about so far?
The only other point I had that I was thinking earlier about making, and that is setting goals, like just goal setting. And that I like to have a pre-order out for my books. When I put one book out, I'll put the next one on pre-order just so that people can pre-order it. But then to do that, you've got to guess how long it's going to take you to write and produce that next book.
And you've got to be right.
And you've got to be right. Yeah. Or at least too far out so you can move things closer.
Yeah.
And that's always tricky. That's I had some panicked editing last year that happened because I put it a little bit too close. So a lot of stress comes from that. And even though I'm my own boss, I should be a better boss.
I was going to say that's not always that's the. And I'm intrigued by that because, so first of all, you said I put a book out and I put a pre-order out for the next book. So how big is that window?
This past one, I gave myself 6 months.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a bunch of different projects I'm working on. And this techno-thriller series, I could probably write one in 3 months, but then it's got to go to the editor and stuff's got to happen. Yeah. And so I kind of calculated how long is this going to take me to write and do my editing and get to him and back again and then add 20% because, it's just going to take longer than I think it's going to take.
Stuff always happens. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is that more a way to keep yourself on track, or are you finding that that folks are taking you up on it and doing those pre-orders?
People are pre-ordering. Yeah. A lot of people will finish the book and they want the next one. So they'll hit that pre-order button.
And is that something you put actually in the ebook itself, or are you communicating in other ways, or both?
I put it in the ebook itself in the, right after the end of like there's the end and then there's the, hey, follow this. Here is the link to the next one. That is
ballsy. Kudos for that. And obviously, I mean, you've got the sort of infrastructure in your life that you can do that, but also on a technical front. So obviously Amazon does pre-orders. How are you handling that as a wide author? Where's that money going? Where are those orders going to?
It's almost entirely Amazon. And actually, I don't even know if I have the pre-order up for the rest of them yet, because this one, I put it out there before I even have cover art. It's got like a dummy cover.
Yeah.
There was one book where I didn't do that because I didn't know when I would get to the next one. And boy, I regret it because I sold a lot of that book and didn't collect any pre-orders. And then the next book came out and it was like kind of lackluster. People didn't come back and pick that up. So that pre-order infrastructure is a big deal, I think. And my future series, I'll start that right away.
Doing the pre-order that far out, I give you props for that, and I'm toying with the idea now. I'm thinking
this time I think I had the outline done and half the book written, so like I know what it's going to be, and I looked at how long it took for the last book.
Right.
This is the 6th book in the series. So I know at this point how long it's going to take, how much work it is.
Right.
And once I knew that was going to be okay, then setting that way out, hardly a risk at all.
Well, and I think expanding on that, it's not as much of a risk for you because you have those systems. You have, you've figured out, what you're going to be able to do. It sounds like you've systematized things pretty well so that you can gauge things appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have a lot of buffer in there, and I'm using a lot of time to work on the next series, but I've definitely got these. The priority is the one that has the pre-order, and I want to make sure that gets out at a reasonable time.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Very good. Well, this has been so much fun and informative. And once again, as I'd hoped, you're offering some different perspectives and different experiences from the other folks I've talked to. So I'm sure this will have a lot of value for the listeners who are all at various stages of their creative journey.
Yes. Well, yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I think this has been great. I look forward to listening to some of these interviews.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
Yep. Thank you.
Hey, if you've enjoyed this or any other episode of Sonitotum, I've got 3 things that I would love for you to do for me to help show your support for the show. The first thing is, if you haven't already, wherever it is that you get your podcasts, please subscribe for free to Sonitotum. Just click that subscribe button for Sonitotum wherever it is that you might have heard this episode, wherever it is you get your podcasts. Next, wherever it is that you get your podcasts, I hope you'll take just a moment to rate and review Sonitotum. Tell the world why you enjoy the show and why other people should listen to it and subscribe for free. And finally, if you'd like to go the extra mile, you have the will and the means, I hope you'll consider becoming a patron of Sonitotum and my other creative endeavors. For just $5 a month, not only will you be a member of the Multiversalists community of writers and readers and creators, you will receive all kinds of special access, perks, and exclusive content, not least of which is the uncut, unproduced edition of every episode of Sonitotum. Just go to mattselznick.com/b-a-patron or visit patreon.com/mattselznick and pledge just $5 a month to support the show through your patronage. That's it. If you can do 1 or 2 or all 3 of those things, you'll be really helping the show and helping me reach more people with the Sonitotum mission of making stuff, finding success, and staying healthy and sane in the process. Thanks. Folks, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Anthony W. Eichenlaub. I sure did. It was really intriguing to hear about his teaching in particular. I used to be a trainer in another life, retail trainer, and teaching is something that I particularly enjoy, and I think based on other people's feedback, I'm pretty good at it. So I've been re-listening to this interview and going through and editing it and everything since I hadn't really heard it since January. I was reminded that at the very least, I should probably start thinking about some courses that I could offer over there at mattselznick.com. And so if you are interested in anything like that, if there are things that you think I could teach you that knowing this show and knowing my work as you might, what is it that you would like to see me do as far as an online course? And to that end, you can let me know, as well as let me know what you thought about this episode or any episode of Sonitotum. You can go to mattselznick.com/sonitotum-081, scroll down to the comments section, leave a comment there, or you can simply email me at matt@mattselznick.com. Or if you like, regular listeners know the drill by now, you can record a little voice message on your phone and email that to matt@mattselznick.com, and I will respond to that. Well, I'll respond to all your feedback one way or the other, but if you leave a little voice message, I'll include that in a later episode of the show and respond directly there. I want to take this moment, as always, to thank my Multiversalist patron supporters. You heard all about how you can become a Multiversalist in the little interstitial just a few minutes ago. It's $5 a month. mattselznick.com/b-a-patron to help support this podcast and my other creative endeavors and the tiny but ever-growing community that we're building together. Thank you to the existing Multiversalist patrons, Chuck Anderson, Amy Bowen, J.C. Hutchins, and Ted Leonhardt. If you go to mattselznick.com/b-a-patron, you can see their pictures and links to their stuff as well. So check out those patrons and consider becoming a patron at mattselznick.com/b-a-patron. All right, folks, I want to thank Anthony W. Eichenlaub for sitting down with me back in January and having that conversation. Once again, you can find his stuff at anthonyeichenlaub.com. Anthony, EICHENLAUB.com. Give his stuff a look. And by the way, if any of your comments or emails want to be directed directly to Anthony, questions you might have for him based on things you heard in this episode, I will, of course, make sure that he receives that correspondence or that comment so that he can respond to you. There it is, gang. My name is Matthew Wayne Selznick. Take care.